So you don't shun the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that send. It's gonna get you sun in the end.
Welcome back to the Speakeasy. I'm Damon Bolte.
I'm Souther Teague.
And I'm Greg Benson. And Damon, congratulations are in order, man. I hear that my birthday twin had a big celebration over the weekend.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Happy birthday to you, obviously. Yeah, Grand Army Bar turned 10 years 10 years old on Sunday, and what a great day. Just lots of friendly faces. People I had no intention, no idea that we're ever going to show up. And some people that. We're wearing one thing about Grand Army is we've always had pretty incredible merchandise for sale, like our t-shirts and just swag and stuff. So it was really cool to see how many just regulars, like non-industry people, were there, and they wore their Grand Army t-shirts, and some of them
wore the shirt to the concert.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. But there were a few people there wearing our very first t-shirt from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God. I still have some first gen t-shirts and second gen, but I've grown a lot since then, both, mentally, emotionally, and specifically physically. So I don't really wear those shirts anymore. And they've shrunk, not me. But it was great, just getting to hang out. We had a great time. Greg was there. Souther, you got into your fourth wreck on your scooter. It's time to hang that up, buddy.
Yeah, fast becoming my least favorite hobby is getting hit by cars on my scooter. So this is episode 4 of that. Hopefully the last episode.
It's getting old. The show's jumped the shark. The guys are kind of just running out of material.
They got to let that trend die. It's like top knots for dudes, get past it, mate.
Thanks. No blood loss, no broken bones this time, but I am bruised and sore and limping, and
but you wear a helmet, right?
Days. I always wear my helmet.
Okay, good.
I got over my young foolish days of not wearing a helmet back when I was a motorcycle rider.
Of course.
Growing up in Florida where there's no helmet law, I didn't wear them there. But then got
same in Oklahoma. I started wearing a helmet almost immediately when I started riding. So and it's one of those things where it's I feel. It's like if I walk out of the house without my and I forget my cell phone, and I feel naked without it. It's that's the same way I feel about a helmet. Even if I'm in Hawaii and I rent a bike, it's I always I get one of their dorky helmets and wear it because it's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Brain bucket.
But good. We're glad to know that you're okay. You were missed at the show. At the party.
Well,
it was kind of a show.
You
gave a speech. There was a tattoo artist. It was a fun time, man. Well, it was also good to see you in 3 dimensions. But you got a what?
Pigeon somewhere down here.
Yep, there it is.
It's healing up. And that's the thing about Grand Army parties. It's we typically have a tattoo artist on site, and there's always some fun elements that we don't normally have. So but 10 years, thanks to everyone who came out. And
10 years anywhere, 10 years in New York. Come on.
Yeah. Seriously. So, we also went upstate. We were there last weekend before Robbie Nelson for his wedding. He and Corey Joe had a beautiful wedding. Then we went upstate, and it was really fun. We went up to Vermont. Jamie had never been upstate or anywhere north of New York, really. And it was fun to see. We went to a couple of places, and they were they recognized my voice, and they're like, "Oh shit, you're Damon Bolte." I'm like, "How'd you know?" And they're like, "I listened to the radio show." And so, when I first brought you on as a co-host, you used to say, kind of tongue in cheek, to the 4 people out there who are listening. There are more than 4 people, so thank you to our extended audience who are out there. But enough about us. We need to get into this show because we got a lot to talk about. But thanks for the congratulations on Grand Army. We really appreciate it, and it was a fun time. And hopefully here's to 10 more if my stress level can take it.
Yeah, let's go.
Well, I mean, as we were saying, 10 years in New York is a long time. And speaking of things that have been around for a long time, we've got live from Caledonia, we have Douglas Taylor from Bruichladdich and the Botanist. Welcome, Douglas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I'm very pleased to be here, but I wish I'd been at the Grand Army 10-year party by this time.
Oh, yeah, man. You were missed.
Speaking of jealous of the tattoo.
I think the 10-year party, though, at any bar in New York anyway, the 10-year party lasts from the birthday till the 11-year party.
Oh, yeah, it's a year of celebrations. It's a year of celebrations.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Doug,
it's like a diamond jubilee that way.
Yeah, exactly.
We've done a lot of activations and cool menu placements with Bruichladdich and especially Botanist because it's an oyster bar, so we do a lot of martinis, Martini Monday kind of stuff.
Nice,
so
nice.
So I can't wait to hear it from the source. Like I've been a huge fan of both for a long time, and also I came up with a cocktail many years ago. There was kind of like a play on the Delmonico cocktail, which is a perfect martini, but a split base of gin and brandy. And I did that I did that with Bruichladdich and Botanist as long ago as I can remember. And I think it was called East Meets West or something like that. But it was essentially that, but with a split base of gin and Scotch, which basically you took a martini and a Rob Roy and you put them together in the glass. And Julie Reiner called it strong and strange, but in a positive way. So I can't wait to talk about both sides of the distillery here.
Well, this is funny because I had a question that I was going to save till the very end for just like a little dessert for everybody, where I was going to ask you, Douglas. So have any sickos ever tried to combine Botanist and Bruichladdich in a cocktail? And it turns out that
I heard there was one guy.
Yes,
I heard there was one guy.
Yeah, stay away from that dude.
Leave it to me.
But I guess we should talk a little bit about you and how you got on this journey. So tell us a little bit about how you came to work at Bruichladdich in the first place.
Do you know, it's going back to that moment in time. It's an absolute sliding door moment for me. I was working in another company. I was really happy. My career was going great. I was working with a whole lot of brands that I absolutely loved. I loved the people. I was traveling. There was not a chance that I was leaving the job that I was in. And I got this voice message on my mobile phone, and it was a guy called Mark Rainey, who obviously is one of the founders at Bruichladdich, and he just introduced himself. He said he was from Bruichladdich. He pronounced it Bruichladdich, and he said, "I'd like to meet you. I'd like to meet you and discuss the business." And of course, like all of you guys, I love to network. I love to meet new people. We agreed
always
to meet
take the
for
meeting.
lunch. Yeah, take the meeting, because as my dad always said, then you've got a choice, you've got options. But I was just delighted to go and meet Mark and hear a bit about the Bruichladdich journey. And at that point in time, I think it was maybe 9 years old. So reopened in 2001, so we're in 2010 here. And I sat and he spoke at me for 2 hours. And I was utterly mesmerized. This man was talking to me about an industry that I'd spent, 12, 13 years in a way that I'd never heard. A revelation. And before you know it, I'd met all the founders, and I'd come home and said to my wife I was going to give up my job and I was going to invest our savings into this project. And I had this real appetite to be part of something that was doing something completely different. And the joke was, remember the old Jerry Maguire film, You Had Me at Hello? They had me at Barley, they had me at Providence, they had me at Terroir, and that was it. So I resigned and joined the team, and we went on from that was 2011, and that was the year actually that we launched the Botanist gin as well. So the connection going back to the period that I joined, or the period that I started my journey. And I remember it was the 10th anniversary, and I'm not long in the door. And Mark and Simon said to me, actually, we'd prefer it if you did we'd invited all these journalists, we'd invited all our distributors, there were friends of the company, there was the friends of Bruichladdich, there was the laddie nerds of the world, there were investors. And they said, we'd like you to give the speech on the 10th anniversary. So it was quite a thought, actually. You were straight in the door and you were immediately part of the team. You were immediately in as one of the band of brothers and sisters. And at the time, we were probably only 30 to 40 people, something like that. And that was it. And I saw it, sliding doors, stumbled into it, met someone who was passionate about what they were doing. I was hugely moved and inspired and took a risk. And here I am, 15 years later. I'm still here.
Well, and it's great. And talk to us a little bit about like when you were being mesmerized, what were some of the key things that made you say, I'm going to up into my life, quit my job, invest my savings, as you said, with or without my wife's permission, maybe, and change everything. What were some of the phrases that were dropped on you that hooked you in, hook us in?
I'd like to say I did get her permission. So she's still my wife. She's still my wife. It's not I didn't get my ex-wife's permission. No, she's still my wife. Well, the whole concept was about flavor and where flavor comes from. And if you think about the industry at the time, we were being told a narrative that was around a bit about the oak and a bit about the still. A dent in the still, the shape of the still, the region. The region would play a role in the flavor. So you had region, you had the still, and you had the wood, and really that was where flavor came from. How old it was part of the mix, and that drove the value. And Mark was talking to me about ingredients. He was talking to me about how we had become disconnected from the raw ingredients, and how terroir was as important in whiskey as it was in cheese or it was in champagne, but it was completely not debunked, but there was a resistance from the industry to accept that because of the aggressive chemical process that happens during distillation, that you couldn't possibly track flavor back to raw ingredients. So they were talking about the flavor that would come from the raw ingredients, the fact that something didn't need to be old to be good. So why would a 10-year-old be better than an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old? If you had this incredible focus on the provenance and the authenticity and the traceability of the ingredients, the way that it was made. So the Bruichladdich distillery is built in 1881, and it's still using much of the old Victorian equipment. So it's slow trickle distillation. It's a long fermentation. So you had a lot of flavor coming from this part of the process as well. You had the fruity floral side coming from that. And then he would talk to me about the experimentation side, this notion of what if, the constant curiosity of, giving birth to brands like Optimor. What have we used the most heavily peated malt that there was ever produced by the maltster and made whiskey with it? And it was this constant burning desire to I suppose at the time it was Rage Against the Machine as well, because there was so much marketing at the time, and again, I'd grown up in this world, and don't get me wrong, I love the big brands and I love the big marketing campaigns and I love how brands storytell, but it was a realization that there was a place for a different narrative, for a different group of consumers, for a different set of brands and products to exist that would tell a different type of story. So I guess he was talking about when we think about sustainability today, and we'll maybe mention B Corp later on, we think a lot about environmental sustainability, but there was a huge social sustainability project.
Yeah, that's important
to the Bruichladdich movement as well. It was this resurrect it, reopen it, conceive it, distill it, mature it, bottle it on the island. It was create careers for people, not just jobs. It was become this vertically integrated business on the island and create something that at the time didn't exist. And this is weird to think about it, but the Islay, the provenance of Islay, you didn't have products at the time that were grown there, distilled there, matured there, and bottled there and shipped. So when you were in the US or when you were in Japan or wherever you were around the world, nobody was getting a product that had lived its entire life on Islay. And that was the vision of the Bruichladdich story. It was to have everything done there, so that when it was shipped with Islay Spring, brought down to bottling strength with Islay Spring water, that cork went in the bottle at the distillery by someone local who worked there, and that was a new way of looking at Islay single malt Scotch whisky at the time. And actually, I think as an industry, we'd kind of lost touch with the connection between agriculture and the whiskey, the end product. And I remember we used to do tastings, and if you were doing a tasting with someone that maybe wasn't from such didn't have the knowledge base, and you said, what's in a smoky whiskey from Islay, they would say, oh, it's peat and water and yeast. If they were lucky, they'd get yeast, but there was nothing about the actual barley, the malt that was in there. So it was just this wonderful opportunity to be part of something that would go on, and I think Bruichladdich has gone on to be an inspiration in the industry, and every person that's been part of that team over the years has played a really important role in championing the cause.
Well, the one thing that really strikes me when I think about, the Bruichladdich brand is the fact that it is kind of iconoclastic. It's not afraid to kind of upset the apple cart and kind of rethink, okay, what if we did this? I mean, you mentioned Octomore, which is definitely, it's out there. It's definitely what you would describe as an experimental whiskey. But it also kind of sounds to me like when this distillery got started, it was almost radical to go back to the roots of what the spirit has been for the better part of a millennium now. It seems like a lot of, we're not here to trash anybody, so we don't have to name names, but it sounds like the general character of the industry was that they were chasing the wrong things, and they'd gotten away from the heart of what was special. And the idea is to kind of bring it back. Am I getting a right read on that?
Yeah, and it's no different. Like it's the Industrial Revolution. It's no different to the way the world has gone. So whether you're talking about monoculture versus permaculture, or whether you're talking about rapid industrialization or technology, we have been striving for growth as a global organism. We've been striving for growth in every sector, in every country. So you look for ways to become efficient. And I think as an industry, we were also chasing efficiencies. We were chasing efficiencies like speed of growth, yield, distillation yield rather than agronomic yield, disease resistance, price per ton. So we were chasing things that would allow us to remain. I say we, I'm talking as an industry, obviously, we were chasing things that would allow us to remain competitive, to improve yield, to improve profitability, to improve growth, to sell more bottles, to be consistent around the world, and so that everything would look the same and taste the same in every country. And that's also why we were doing things like, as an industry, chill filtering to get to 40%. So we're a standardized ABV. We were chill filtering, which meant we were taking a lot of the oil and a lot of the flavor out. Sometimes we were adding a bit of E150 to get a really, and again, when you're a global brand and you're selling 5, 10, 15, 20 million cases a year, and you want to look the same and feel the same and taste the same everywhere, then that makes sense. But as you go down that path and you slowly realize that the farming practices, so in our game, the farming practices that you're pursuing are having a massive effect on soil health, which is having a massive effect on the likelihood of there being more than, I don't know what we say, between 60 and 100 harvests left, which means that the value is being stripped out of the farming process, because the farmers have to pay a lot more for the agrochemicals, so they're not making any money. The soil is being depleted, which means it's not able to hold its nutrients and its microbiology properly, so you're not getting decent crops. It's getting washed off into the ocean, which is affecting ocean health. And suddenly you realize the whole thing is interconnected. And what if we were to pay a bit more attention to agriculture, which would mean a bit more attention to crop rotation? We didn't call it crop rotation in 2001 when the distillery company was reopened, and we started to grow barley again on Islay in 2003. We started to work with organic farmers in 2004. We were resurrecting ancient land races grown by farmers 5,000 years ago in 2005. That's bear barley. We were doing biodynamic barley by 2011. All these things, we didn't package them up as a big CSR or a big environmental sustainability initiative. We were just doing things that was a pursuit of flavor that unlocked the realization that sustainability and sustainable agriculture and building the interdependencies back into the process that had been lost was really, really important. And it's not until today, because I can tell you that trying to sell Isle of Barley whiskey, organic single malt Scotch, biodynamic single malt Scotch. It's really hard. Nobody buys it. Nobody's interested. You know, the quantities that we sell are tiny because you've still got to try and break through the chain. You know, how do we get to consumers? How do we sell? Well, we still go through a traditional route to market. So it's really, really hard to try and tell that message when you're small like us and you don't have really deep pockets. So somewhere in this mix, Bruichladdich was doing something to try and upend an industry on and try and create a realization that raw ingredients mattered, the pursuit of flavor was really important, terroir existed within whiskey, and that could give birth to a lot of exciting innovation, which actually is something that we like. You know, we love innovation. We don't want to hear about something that was a bourbon cask followed by a sherry cask is now a sherry cask followed by a bourbon cask. You know, that's not innovation. Or, you know, 3 types of wood instead of 2 types of wood. That's not really innovation. What's more interesting is something that's thought-provoking, I think. And this part of Bruichladdich, you know, we're self-proclaimed progressive Hebridean distillers. So this progressive, thought-provoking nature to try and do things that stood for something that would create a conversation. And actually, during the period of COVID lockdown, we've all lost track of what happened when, haven't we?
Yeah.
There were various papers written, and Mark Rainey, coming back to Mark as one of the founders, had written a paper about flavour and terroir and how you could identify different flavours in the finished article going back to the provenance, either the variety or the season, spring versus winter, or the regionality that it was grown. And it was then broadly accepted by the industry after 2 decades of battling. So there was something magical about the Bruichladdich story because it was doing more than just resurrecting, making and selling whiskey, brackets, and then gin. It was genuinely a project, and we still talk about it as a project, never finished, never complete. You know, we're the current guardians of that project at the moment. But it was doing something to try and revolutionize or to snap people out of a daze, a whiskey daze, a Scotch whiskey daze that we're in. And it was so interesting for me because at the time I was in the world of the big brands who were building big, brilliant, beautiful brands, but with a very different point of view in the world and not really talking about the process. And that takes you into a whole load of other conversations that get you into agriculture and subsidies and farmers and politics and things. But it's such a rich area that was underdeveloped in conversation with people that were drinking whiskey for a long, long time.
Sure. And even in that conversation you just talked to us about, you mentioned self-proclaimed, but the fact of the matter is you're not just self-proclaimed anymore. Your company's a B Corp, and B Corp status is a difficult thing to achieve, right?
Really difficult. Yeah, really difficult. And
can you remind the listener a little bit about what B Corp is?
Yeah, so B Corp is a certification that, in a word, says that you use your business as a force for good. It ensures that you put people and the planet on an equal footing to profit. It doesn't mean that you don't make profit, because you do need to be commercially successful to exist. Started around 2006 by a charity called B-Lab in the west coast of the US. And at the time that we were looking at becoming a B Corp, I reckon there were maybe 2,500 in the world totally across all different sectors. So that's 14 years of the B-Lab, B Corp movement. What's interesting is it's gathered a real head of steam since then. So I think during COVID and during lockdown, there were loads of companies and producers and founders who had time in their hands and who wanted to pursue some other projects that maybe had been niggling in their mind, but never been able to go after. But coming back to our story, a couple of different things. Somebody had talked to me about it here in Scotland. Somebody had talked to me about it in the US. I was quite interested in it, so I started to do a bit of research and spoke to a clothing company, a company called Finisterre in the south coast of England, who were their position was all about oceans health, but they were creating surf gear. The guy that founded it, Tom Kay, I managed to get in touch with him. I spoke to him on the phone, introduced myself, and explained who we were and what we did. And he said, do this thing called the business impact assessment offline. And if you score more than 40, bearing in mind the threshold to be certified is 80, if you score more than 40, keep going. If you score less than 40, it's probably too big a jump for you. And the other thing he said was, don't burden your whole business with it. And I didn't know if I agreed with that piece. So I remember taking it to our management team and saying, look, there's this idea, there's this movement called B Corp. It seems to fit with what we do. Here's what it would take. And there was a real pushback from the management team just to say, look, Douglas, we've got too many projects on the go at the moment. It was a capacity issue rather than a desire. So they liked the idea, but like any small founder-led business, everybody's got 3 jobs, 4 hats, and trying to do different things at different times. You're always trying to keep the wolf from the door. But Tom's advice was true. He said, do it. Don't burden the whole business. Do it yourself and bring someone else in to help you, which is what we did. And it took us about 18 months. What I would say is, and I know this because afterwards I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, hey, Douglas, what did you have to do and what does it mean? And I was able to step back and say, we actually didn't have to change much about the business. And that told me that it was a validation that the project that was established in 2001, and actually the project was established 4 years before that when Mark and Simon were trying to buy Bruichladdich from Jim Beam Brands at the time, owned by a subsidiary, White Mackay. It always had an idea to do something more than just make whiskey on Islay or just make thought-provoking spirits on Islay. So we did that, we certified, and there was this great celebration, but because you're then in this weird place where you're then trying to tell everyone about this thing that nobody understands, that nobody knows, and half of your colleagues think is it marketing bullshit? Is it a badge? Nobody's heard about it. There's hardly any companies. So you have to recertify every 3 years. But it takes about 6 months to recertify. It took us about 6 months to recertify. So actually you start that process 2.5 years in. When we've done it the second time, which we did last year, and we scored, the first time round we scored 82.3, I think, so just over the line. And this time we scored just over 100. The target was to get over 100. I think we're 100.7. And that was easier because we took a wider team to go through the recertification. People had lived with it for a couple of years. They were more comfortable with it. They could see the tangible benefits of it. And it's been amazing because we get to speak to loads of other B Corp businesses as well, different industries, service sector or manufacturing, and we can share and we can pass on knowledge, or they can share and pass on knowledge to us.
Well, and you can influence one another as well, right? Like if you said, I'm just going to pull something out of the air here, but if you said to whoever's making the glass for the bottles, hey, we're a B Corp, we'd like you to be a B Corp as well, right? They would follow suit. And then it just becomes like this sort of spread, right?
It's that, but it's also like you're sharing, like tips of how to fix these little pods of like like to build those points up. Like we, Lawrence and I, like we have, he has Spatterton Brokerage, and so he handles a bunch of herbal medicine and cosmetics and things like that. So, and you mentioned the clothing brand, so it's not just we in our little bubble of the spirits and the liquid industry, as it were. It expands further than that. So there's a lot of shared knowledge there. It's a like cool. not to boil it down to be goofy, but like B Corp recognized B Corp. Yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah.
Once you're in that club,
it really is.
People want to work with you. People want to collaborate with you because you're all doing the same.
Think about it. It's
collaboration.
B2B.
Yeah. B2B.
Literally. B Corp to B Corp.
But it's coming back to this point about gathering ahead of steam. There must be twice as many B Corps in 2025 as there were in 2020.
Oh, for
so you can see this huge push, and I think there are something like 80 to 100,000 companies worldwide who are using the business impact assessment just as a framework for doing business. They don't actually want to become certified, but they're using it as a framework because they know it's a great guide. It's got great principles. And one of the battles with it is also that you end up sometimes in a debate where you're making a decision that puts investment into one part of the business, but maybe doesn't answer the people side of the business, and you sometimes get challenged back to say, hey, I thought you were a B Corp. It's all about people and the planet. And you have to say, yes, but we do have to be commercially successful in order to exist. So you can't ignore or play down the profit piece, and you shouldn't be embarrassed or ashamed if you do make decisions that help you sell more, because actually if you sell more, you can make more to invest back into your other initiatives, and that's where the whole thing becomes a bit more self-sustaining.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by the whole B Corp thing. My company's trying to start looking into it. We've started down the road of the business assessment situation as well. And but let's talk more about whiskey and gin. That's
Yes.
that's what our listener wants to hear about. What's going on in the world of production for Bruichladdich and Botanist gin?
Well, I almost want to back up a second, actually,
Okay.
because I'm always been deeply curious, and I'm very excited to ask you, like, if you're making a highly peated single malt Scotch brand, the logical jump, as we all know, is to make a dry gin. Like, where
Of course
did
it is. Of
of
course it
course,
is.
yeah. Where did that idea even what was that first pitch meeting like, and how did it make it from there to here?
Well, so this story starts probably 2007. And so imagine this, paint the picture. The distillery has been reopened, but it was mothballed between 1994 and 2000. It's a bit rusty. It's got lots of areas that need upgraded, but the bones of it are there. The bones of what you need are there, but there's bits that we need to upgrade, but we've not got any money. And word passes through to Duncan McGilvray, who was the then general manager at Bruichladdich. Word passes to Duncan that there's a distillery on the mainland near Glasgow in a place called Dumbarton, and the distillery is called Inverleven, and it's a grain distillery that's being demolished because it's no longer needed. It's surplus to requirements, like a lot of these distillery demolitions were back in the past, and it's full of great equipment and pipes and stairs and filters and tanks and things. And the demolition guy, Demolition Dave, was a friend of Duncan's, calls Duncan and says, look, we're on site. You guys should come down here because I think you'll get a lot of equipment from Inverleven. Without checking with anyone, Duncan and Jim, so Jim McEwen, Duncan McGilvray, they get a squad together. They head from Islay down the west coast to Dumbarton to Inverleven Distillery, and they go in, and there's loads of wonderful equipment. But what they didn't realize was on the first floor, there was a single malt distillery, and that single malt distillery still had a Loman still, so these experimental stills with the interchangeable necks that was somewhere between a column and a pot, but it was very much a 1960s design. I think there were only half a dozen of them ever produced, and there's only one other working Loman still left in the country up in Scapa, and it's used as a wash still. So there was this still, which we all now know as Ugly Betty. That's this Botanist still. So a bit of a give the game away here. But what do we do? Well, we'll take this still. And there's a really funny part in this story where, because it's on the first floor and the distillery's on the banks of the River Leven, how do you get this still out the gable end of the building? Jim asks one of the workers that's managing the crane with a big wrecking ball if he could punch a hole in the end of this gable end, because he wants to lower the still out onto a barge. And as curiosity would have it, and as time moves on, my friend, now completely disconnected, is the owner of the barge company that sailed the still up the west coast. And the guy says, no, sorry, Jim, I can't do that. Health and safety. I'm actually working on another bit of the site just now. I can't help you. You'll have to find another way. And Jim said, that's a real shame, because I was going to give you a barrel of whiskey. And he said, how big would you like the hole, Jim?
Yeah, right.
And that was it. That was the start. And fast forward, we take all the equipment from the grain distillery, we take all the equipment from the single malt distillery, including this Loman still. It goes onto a barge, it sails up the west coast of Scotland. And if we have time, I'll tell you another story connected to this, relating to a product called Yellow Submarine. It goes all the way up the west coast, and this still sits in the yard at the Port Charlotte warehouse from 2007 through 2009, 10. And at that point, there's a discussion. What do we do with this still? We should probably use it. We should probably put it into the and all of that equipment came to the grand total of £25,000, I believe. Whoa. Back in the day, which we didn't have permission from the investors to spend. We actually didn't have a spare £25,000. So Simon got into a lot of bother with the chairman at the time, but it was the right thing to do, because look what we've got now. So this idea that we could put the Lomond still into the still house while we were doing repairs to the wash still and the spirit still. So if they were having their necks replaced or the condensers upgraded or something, the roof has got to come off our still house to do all that work. So you could lower in this experimental still. Do we make a type of whiskey, another type of whiskey? Do we make a vodka? And at that point, and this is as far as the research goes, Mark, Simon, and Gordon, one of the other founders, all love gin and tonic. So the obvious conclusion was, why don't we try and make a gin? And as soon as they started to talk to Jim McEwen about that, well, Jim was interested in Islay and with this real focus again on terroir and on provenance. Why don't we forage the botanicals locally? What if it's an Islay dry gin? What if it's a dry gin style, but made with botanicals picked on Islay? How would we do that? Well, Duncan McGilvery was this incredible engineer, so he started to make modifications to the still, inserting these baffle plates and putting in a sort of bouquet garni box at the top so that you could have the Islay Botanicals up there. You'd have this gentle infusion. And they ran the still for the first time in 2010 and made a gin. And Simon took it down to London and he went to see two people, and one of them was an ex or a friend of his who was ex beefeater at the time, and I've forgotten his name, and he let him taste it. And the other one was Alessandro Palazzi at Duke's Hotel, who is famous for the martini, right. New York Times best martini of my life. Best martini of my life, and don't have more than two of them. You'll not be on that scooter.
He was just here in New York a few weeks ago. Incredible.
Well, he travels now, doesn't he? He travels all over the place. Mm-hmm. And Simon took it down to both of these friends and said, look, we've had a go. We're a whiskey distillery, as you know, but we've had a go at making a gin. And they both came back and said, look, well, first of all, the immediate reaction on the first tasting was, that's a top, I think it was something like, that's a top 5 gin that I've ever tasted, and then was quickly corrected to maybe a top 3 gin. Mm. And then Alessandro doesn't taste immediately because he serves it frozen from the freezer. So Simon picked up a message 2 days later from Alessandro to say that he'd tasted it and it would be an absolute pleasure to stock it in the Duke's Hotel and to make a Duke's Martini out of it. And at that point, the guys thought, look, we've got something here. And we then started to work out what it was going to be called and when it was going to be produced and where we were going to launch it. So we actually didn't launch it as the Botanist gin into the market until the early parts of 2011, where we started to launch in the US. The US was the first market. It's our biggest market for our Botanist business, and in fact, it's the first market that we launched it in. And it was in a different bottle, if you remember. When it first came out, it was in that rectangular bottle.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
But that was just a catalogue bottle, and the problem was lots of people were using that bottle. And as a producer, you eventually want to have your own proprietary design. So we did that 2013, something like that, and launched the Botanist as you know it today. And that's the story. So pre-gin boom. No analysis, no gap analysis, no big assessment of the opportunity. The founders loved gin and tonic. We had a still. Jim was an artisan, and we had the bounty of the island in front of us, and that's it.
I mean, yeah. I would have thought it was a business decision. I would have thought, often we say here in America, vodka pays the bills, and you see distillers who are making whiskeys that have to sit and rest in barrel for years. They got to make something to make the bills. I just assumed maybe in Scotland, gin came first.
And I will answer that, because I think there is an element of that still in this equation. We were lucky because we weren't a new distillery that didn't have aging inventory. So we'd bought a distillery that had been mothballed, and the warehouses were full of casks from 1994 going back. So we could commercialize whiskey that had been distilled by someone else. What you would see in today's world with new distillery projects, they would often release a vodka or a gin until their whiskey was mature. So it's a cash flow thing, because you can't believe the amount of cash that you need to lay down whiskey, and you're leaving it to mature for between 3 and 15 years, depending on the type of profile that you're looking for.
Sure. So that means you're making every day for 3 years before you're selling anything.
At least.
And that's on the hope, minimal, right? And that's on the hope.
All the salaries.
That's on the hope that it sells.
All the
and
salaries,
that people like it.
All the energy, all the warehousing costs, all the wood. Wood is expensive. So you've got that side of things. Our situation was slightly different, and we had a second business at the time called Murray McDavid, which was an independent bottling business. So we were selling independently bottled single malt Scotch, and we were also selling rum with a business called Renegade Rum. And around 2011, we were also realizing that the growth of the brands that we didn't produce was moving slightly faster than the growth of Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, and Altamore, and therefore it made sense for us to try and offload the stuff that we couldn't guarantee the future of, that wasn't really speaking of the ethos of Bruichladdich. Again, it was a cash flow thing. It was a business that Mark and Simon had before that they folded in as part of their equity. So the Botanist would come in and it would fill a void that was coming out the P&L in some ways. So there's a bit of a financial exercise in there, but it wasn't designed like that. Whereas you would imagine nowadays there's lots of white spirits that are designed to be a cash generator in the short term.
Well, the thing to me about that is it is like, as you said and as others said, it is the it pays the bills while you're making whiskey and laying down in casks for time, right? So to me, it's really interesting to see the Botanist comes out of a place of passion and a desire to have a gin, and not so much to pay the bills, like while the whiskey's being laid down. As you said, there's been whiskey since '94. This is an old distillery, and I got to touch on design for a little bit. It'll come back around, I promise. It usually does. My points take me a little bit. We'll take you on a little walk here, but me being a graphic designer before I got into the booze business, I can't help but notice packaging and design. And the Bruichladdich, like the modern design of it. I mean, like there's also color theory and like how like your cool colors are meant for like grocery stores and places to make you slow down and shop. And your warm colors are to stimulate your appetite and make you like drink and eat faster, like think fast food, right? So the thing I've always loved about the Bruichladdich is like this cool, like almost Tiffany blue-green color on the bottles. And it's like, in theory, that shouldn't work in the booze biz, historically. But it stands out so much. Yeah. And it like on the laddies, right? And so, and even just the actual graphic design of it, there's been a lot of, I would say over the past 15 plus years, there's been a lot of really, really impressive rebranding, specifically in the Scotch BU, and it's been really cool. But then also you've got the Botanist, which, like you said, it started out with like kind of stock glass and a front label, but it is such a unique mold with the embossed, writing around it, and then there's also the mixing glasses that match it, which are really cool. But to me, it's like there's something to be said about design that for your general consumer, like people outside of our bubble who work in the biz and are enthusiasts, to where they see something and then they're like, all right, that looks like it's going to taste good because they put a lot of thought into the design of it. But then turns out this stuff is really good. It's some of my favorite stuff. And even like, I remember when the Octomore came out, the first one, I was just like, what the fuck is this? This looks like some sort of like, it looks like it's going to, like,
it looks like a slab from an ancient alien species.
Exactly. And then with the PC, like the Port Charlotte series, I mean, like it's just everything. There's even between the Scotch and then the gin, there's kind of like this consistent through line of design. Even though they're different designs, you can kind of tell they're from the same origin, like place of origin. So there's that. And we talked a little bit at the top of the show about kind of progress. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and especially with the way that bars, like cocktail menus and bars are kind of, you're starting to see things like you were talking about, like bourbon cast finish and sherry cast finish and port cast finish, right? And that's kind of, it's not necessarily so modern because it's been going on for a long time. But we're starting to see different types of cast finish and things like that. But I think there's like a certain level of like with a progressive design, there's also kind of an anti-progress movement going on, whereas people want the things like floor malted grains and they want something that's cask strength and something that's made in the old way. Even with gin, it's like, people are starting to get really like into the and you can see it on cocktail menus too. And even in cocktail programs with a lot of modern bars, they're like, you know what, we're ditching the centrifuge and the rotovap and the smokers and all that stuff. We're just going to make you the best fucking Manhattan martini, Rob Roy, Negroni that we can possibly make. And it's like kind of an anti-progress, but that's also progressive in a weird way, right? And I feel like Bruichladdich and Botanist are both there with that movement, especially with B Corp. You didn't have to do that. Certified B Corp is a movement that a lot of people still don't understand, but I think the ones who do get it, and they're like, wow, they put the effort in for something that's really important for not only the industry, but the environment. And I can get behind that, where it used to be like certified organic. It's like, well, everything's certified organic now, basically. So now it's like the next step, the certified B Corp. So I think to me, it's like, I've always really loved these brands, and just to hear that and just constantly seeing what's coming out, the next steps and the next expressions. It's just like, and I'm not like trying to like blow smoke or anything. I truly, like, I've been like a collector of Octomore since the beginning, and the PC like series too. And I just like, it's so cool to have you on to talk about it. But to know again that, the B Corp movement is really important. And it's cool. And you keep talking about you're like a small company. It's like, I call bullshit. If I can get like a botanist, if I can get a botanist on a flight, to have my gin and tonic, which I love, it's like, I think you're doing all right, So, I mean, like,
the four listeners, the four drinkers of Botanist.
Four listeners, yeah. But it's funny. It's a real, I get a real sense of pride listening to you speak there and compliment the distillery. There's a real sense of democratization here. So it's a pretty flat structure. Yes, we've got managers, and yes, we've got bosses, but the reality is there's a huge focus on the role that everybody plays and the role that everybody has played at different points in time. And even when you think about this notion of progress, so we talk about a Victorian distillery reimagined for the future. So you keep all the old Victorian equipment, but you have this forward thinking mentality. And we've also used the phrase in the past, a revolutionary old idea, which is about going back to farming methodologies and practices that actually are the best thing for today, for the environment, for the future. Or you talk about the packaging design, and working with one of our great friends and partners, Paul Jarvis, who was the designer that we worked with for many, many years and really pushed us to come up with this provocative packaging style that was, again, the antidote to the industry. When everyone else was beige and tall and serif text, we were going to be ranged left, we were going to be short and squat, we were going to be sans serif, we were going to be Bauhaus come brutalist, using German motorway fonts rather than, and you would, but it's a brave, courageous move. And I've been on the wrong end of people saying to me, you have really fucked up your packaging design as well. So it's polarizing, it's really polarizing. And so is the color is really polarizing. Some people are not comfortable to drink a Scotch that comes in a bottle that color. And that's amazing for me. So I think you set your stall out, you have to do something with your packaging that needs to be, one, speaking of the ethos of the distillery company, and two, it's got to be backed up by award-winning liquid that stands for something that is provocative and goes on to be admired by us as consumers, or by other people in the industry, or by partners in the trade. So it's not been necessarily an easy journey, and the Octomore one is great. Nobody will buy it. It's in a black bottle. You can't see the liquid, and seeing the liquid is a definer of quality, apparently. So it's in a black torpedo-shaped bottle. It's too heavily peated. It's too young. It's too expensive, and you can't see the liquid. It'll never work. If you'd researched
you can barely read the label.
You can barely read the label. If you'd researched that, everything would have said, "Do not launch this product. It's commercial suicide."
Yeah.
Yet, when it's born into a certain family or a certain project, as it was with Bruichladdich, it goes on to be something curious and interesting, and goes on to get some crazy cult status.
And it's
Yeah,
iconic.
how many people? Right. How many people told the Colonel no one's going to buy chicken in a bucket?
Yeah, that's true.
Now we can't have chicken any other way.
Yeah, well, right. So let me ask Douglas. I almost just said Douglas. I just, out of curiosity and fun, do you have a go-to out of the line? I mean, as far as the
I do. I've got two go-tos, and you were talking about the Laddie and the Aqua and so this notion that the classic Laddie is a cuvee, it's an assemblage, it brings everything together. So everything that I've been talking about, the types of barley, the regional variances where they've been grown, the age profiles, the typical age profile of a classic Laddie is 8 or 9 years old. As our stock is aging, that 5 years ago it was 6, 7 years old. It's getting up towards 8, 9 years old. It'll continue to evolve, but the completeness of that dram is off the charts good for me. Classic Laddie is an absolute knockout entry-level product in a range. So it's called classic. It's normally reserved for the top end. That for me is a real go-to. If I stay within the unpeated part of our portfolio, the Bruichladdich family, the other one that I love, and I don't know if you've tried it, is Bear Barley. It's this ancient landrace that we were propagating with the University of Highlands and Islands that was put to us as an idea to bring it back so that it could be used by bread makers and brewers in the north of Scotland in the Orkney Islands. And we said we would partner with them and we would try and grow it on Islay. It was really hard to grow it on Islay, actually. And it went on to break the rake in the mash tun, because the kernels on Bear Barley, normally you have 2 row heads, so you've got the stalk and then you get 2 row. Bear Barley is a 6 row head, so the kernels are much smaller, so you need to change the settings on the old Bobby Mill, and then the way that you mash it is completely different, and it created this big thick porridge. It was an absolute nightmare to make whiskey from, and it went on to break the rake, which meant we shut down and stopped making whiskey for 4 months while we had a company recast in iron the molds that would be needed to copy that rake identically from the piece of machinery that we had before. But that whiskey, which is a nightmare to grow, it's a nightmare to make whiskey from, but that malt, that barley, that variety, that story gives you the most incredible taste profile, and that's a go. It's not such a frequent go-to because it's a little bit more expensive, but it's one that I absolutely love. And the current release that we have, the Bear Barley, I think it's around a 10-year-old, just out of interest. But we've been doing the Bear Barley project since 2005.
Well, after all of that, thank fuck it's good, right?
Nothing cool is easy, right?
I remember having lunch with Dave Driscoll from K&L in San Francisco, and of K&L back in the day, and he said to me, "This is all great, Douglas, but none of it matters if the whiskey is not delicious. None of this matters at all." And we were like, "Thank the Lord, yeah, it's absolutely, this is very, very good whiskey." And Jim left a legacy for Adam to take on from 2015. So Adam's been the master blender for a decade, which is incredible to think as well.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, usually when our typical last question for guests, it's kind of an easy one. It's like, so what's coming up next? But for you, I want to ask specifically, because as we've talked about, you're making 2 pretty different products at the end of the day. And I've always found whenever I'm working on anything creative that the best thing oftentimes is to set down something, especially if I'm stuck, and do something else. Like something about the way it rewires your brain, working on something that still gets it moving in a creative avenue, but just in a completely different direction, can often get you out of I don't know, it helps you put down what you were working on before and maybe untangle any knots you might have gotten yourself into struggling to move forward. So making, obviously the Laddie is a very innovative brand that has a lot of experimentation behind it. You've got some cool new stuff coming out for the Botanist as well. So I want to know if you feel like those innovations on either side kind of cross-pollinate into what you're doing on both sides of the brand.
Well, we've actually got 4 different brands. You've got the Bruichladdich brand named after the distillery. You've got the Port Charlotte brand named after the village down the road, where actually we still own the footprint of the old Port Charlotte Loch-and-Dol distillery and the warehouses there. We've then got the Altamore brand, so we've got 3 whiskies, and we've got the Botanist as well. The thing we always say is same DNA, different personalities. That's like children. So you've got 4 different children. They've got the same DNA. They're coming from the same people, the same place, but they show up differently. They act differently. They've got different personalities, and they've also got a different flavor. Bruichladdich is unpeated. Port Charlotte is heavily peated. Altamore is super heavily peated. By the time you add in those 3 whiskey brands together, we're maturing 17 different spirit types in the warehouses. And then you've got the Botanist on top of that. So it's a real medley. It's a real melting pot of brands and profiles and experimentation. And some things work better than others. So I would say like the Islay Barley of Octomore is way more popular than the Islay Barley of Port Charlotte. But they're both a peated profile, and they're both, grown in very specific parts. The Altamore one is very much single farm, single field, single vintage type. And I think that real sort of ultimate expression, Altamore of Altamore, coming from barley grown in Altamore farm, probably elevates that one. The cask exploration is really, really powerful in the Port Charlotte brand. So everybody seems to love the combination of things like sweet white wine casks with a heavily peated Islay single malt. That's an explosion of flavor right there. So that is really interesting. And then from a Bruichladdich point of view, I'd love to say like all that barley provenance stuff is the hottest thing in the range. It's not. I think people love it and they're curious about it and it's interesting. But the big driver on that side of the business is the benchmark product, is the classic Laddie. So I think that we're lucky because we're always spending time together. Whether we're out traveling with the markets, I get huge inspiration visiting people, bars, restaurants, wholesalers, different journalists, people that are doing podcasts like you guys. Get huge inspiration from the market. But I think we're definitely a business that carves its own path. So we don't do a lot of, we should copy that, we should do that. So there must be something about how we do it that creates an energy from the inside. And I guess it's got to come from the team. And there's a lovely sprinkling of madness in the team as well. You've got just the right mix of, the creatives and the doers, and we're all in there together. But you did start by saying what's coming up next, and I would just like to say it's the 25th anniversary next year. So 2026 is going to be a massive year for us. So imagine lots of stuff happening in terms of events, product innovations, moments to come together, whether it be in the US or whether it be at the distillery on Islay. So tons and tons of stuff in development for next year. So I think 2026 is going to be a real biggie for us.
Cool. Sounds like what's next for you really should be a vacation.
Yeah.
That's the yeah of a man who's like, that will never happen.
So we used to have
this next year sounds like it's packed.
Yeah. So Simon used to say, I'm either in something or I'm not in something, but if I'm in, I'm all in. And the second thing he would say is always working. And I think when you run a business like this, it's such it's such an amazing privilege and passion project that you're constantly, you're either talking because your friends are interested in it as well. So you end up talking about it to friends and family, or when you're traveling, and even my children talk about it. And you end up going into school to give a talk on it as well, which probably you shouldn't do for alcohol. But say less about that.
Listen, you're a gentleman farmer at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Douglas, this has been great. I'll admit
Really great.
there are a lot of people that I bring on the show because there's something that some specific thing that I want to talk to them about. Like I remember the first time I'd ever heard of Cristalino tequila. It was a pitch for the show,
yeah?
and I was like,
Yeah.
"The hell is this?" So I had to get them on just to learn about it. But there are also folks where I'm like, well, I got to get this dude on the show because I'm just such a big fan of his stuff. So
Right.
keep up the good work, man. Thank you.
Thank you very
seriously.
much, Greg. Appreciate it.
Well, that's going to do it for us this week on the Speakeasy, but be sure to tune into Heritage Radio Network for more great programs just like this one. And if you want more from this great program, just like this one, you can become a regular on our Patreon page. There you're going to get a free cocktail kit from our friends at Shaker and Spoon every month. You're going to get guest recipes. In this case, we actually have 2 guest recipes. Because Douglas, you gave us a Bruichladdich and a Botanist recipe. So check that out. We're going to have, this is the other thing we got on there. We have tickets for free to all of our Patreon regulars for our 600th episode, which is coming up in exactly 1 month. Jesus Christ. We should probably do some planning on that, but we've got some details we can share with everybody. It is going to be at Fort Hamilton Distillery on June 10th. That's the first day of BCB. That's that Tuesday at noon. We have a special under wraps celebrity guest that we will not be revealing until just beforehand. And it's going to be a good time. If you want to come and see what we look like in 3 dimensions and party with us and hang out, and maybe we'll take some questions, we'll share some laughs, we'll have some drinks. Who knows? But it's going to be a good time. So come on and check it out. Also want to plug that I have another After Dark Confessions coming up on May the 22nd. Once again, no podcasts, no recordings, no nothing from these things. It's an event that happens just one time. So if you want to see it and you want to see the weird stuff that happens as a result, come out and see it May 22nd, Someday Bar here in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue. And be sure to tune in next week when our guest is going to be Jonathan Adler from Shinji's. A lot of interesting stuff to talk about there.
Incredible.
Actually went there for the first time ever last night, which was a hell of a story that you're just going to have to wait until next week to hear about. But for now, from all of us, until next time, cheers, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs